You can't just bolt your own security camera into a city light pole, Mr. Carter. That was the first thing she ever said to me. Not hello, not welcome back to the neighborhood. Just that, delivered with a tight little smile like she'd been waiting years to say it. She stood on my porch in a pressed cream blazer, HOA badge clipped to her lapel like it was a sheriff's star, arms folded, chin tipped slightly up. I hadn't even finished unpacking my boxes. My name's Owen Carter. I'm 37. I write back-end infrastructure for a fintech company out of Denver, and about a year ago I moved back to a place called Maple Hollow after my dad passed. The house was his. Before that it was my granddad's. It's the kind of place where the floors creak in familiar spots and the oak tree in the yard leans like it's listening. And apparently, it was also under the careful supervision of a woman named Vanessa Pike. That camera she was talking about wasn't even new. My dad installed it years ago after a string of break-ins down the street. It fed into a little home server he built in the garage, blinking lights and all. The pole she was pointing at had been there since the 70s, long before Maple Hollow Estates decided to form a homeowners association and start measuring grass height with rulers. That pole's older than the HOA, I told her, leaning against the door frame, arms crossed. And the camera's been there longer than you've been president. Her smile didn't move, but her eyes did. They sharpened. We have compliance standards now, Mr. Carter. Aesthetic continuity matters. I'll be sending you the updated guidelines. Updated. That word would follow me for months. I'd been back less than 48 hours and already I had my first warning. The rain that week didn't help. It was that slow, soaking Colorado drizzle that makes everything feel heavier, like the sky's leaning on you. I stood under the big oak in the front yard the night after Vanessa's visit, staring at the initials carved low into the bark. My dad carved them when I was 12 after I got suspended for mouthing off to a teacher. He dragged me out there, handed me a pocket knife, and said, "When you're mad at the world, carve it here instead of somewhere you can't fix." That tree had seen every version of me. Angry kid, cocky teenager, college dropout for a semester. And now, grown man coming home with a laptop and a box of grief. Vanessa showed up again the next morning. This time it was about the truck. It was my dad's old Ford F-150, faded red, rebuilt twice, parked in the driveway under a tarp that hadn't moved since the funeral. I hadn't been able to start it yet. Didn't feel right. Non-operational vehicles are not permitted to remain visible beyond 72 hours, she said, clipboard hugged tight to her chest. You'll need to remove it or store it in a fully enclosed garage. It runs, I said. Does it? The way she asked it made it clear she already knew it didn't. Or that she'd been watching. It will, I said. You have until Monday. By Monday, I had 3 notices tucked under my windshield wiper. One for the truck. One for leaving my trash bins out at 6:05 p.m. instead of 6. And one for excessive exterior illumination, because my porch light was apparently casting a glow across a shared walkway. $6 a minute, I muttered, staring at the fine breakdown. $50 for 5 minutes of trash bin rebellion. That's when I started reading. If you work in software long enough, you get used to parsing messy documentation, hunting for inconsistencies, looking for the comment someone left in 2009 that explains why the whole thing doesn't crash. So I treated the Maple Hollow HOA handbook like bad code. I read it line by line, highlighted contradictions, flagged sections that referenced amendments without attached votes. Most of the strict language had been added in the last 6 years. Vanessa had taken over as president right around then. At the mailbox cluster one afternoon, I met a guy named Leonard Baines. Late 60s, quiet, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who looked like he'd apologize for breathing too loud. New owner at the Carter place, right? He asked. Old owner's son, I said. He nodded slowly. Your dad didn't like meetings much toward the end. Why's that? Leonard hesitated, glanced down the street toward Vanessa's house. Things changed. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. That Friday, I had 2 coworkers over. Nothing wild. Pizza, a couple beers on the back patio, low music. Around 9:30, 2 patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing, but no sirens. Noise complaint. Possible unauthorized gathering. 3 people and a golden retriever named Biscuit. The officer looked almost embarrassed. We get calls from this address a lot lately, he said. From who? I asked. He didn't answer directly. Just handed back my ID and told us to keep it down, even though it wasn't loud to begin with. Across the street, half hidden behind trimmed hedges, I saw Vanessa. arms crossed, watching. The next morning, there was a letter taped to my door. Notice of observation. Please be advised that social events exceeding standard occupancy expectations must be pre-approved by the board to preserve community harmony. At the bottom, in blue ink, she'd written, "Let's avoid further misunderstandings." I stood there holding that paper, coffee cooling in my hand, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was recognition. This wasn't about trash bins or trucks. It was about control. That night, I climbed into the attic looking for old tax records. Instead, I found a metal lockbox shoved behind a stack of insulation panels. No lock, just dust and a tight latch. Inside were folders, old HOA drafts, meeting minutes from the early 90s, handwritten notes in my dad's blocky print. One line circled in red ink. No retroactive enforcement of amendments without 2/3 homeowner vote. Below it, in his handwriting, watch how they change definitions. I sat there on the attic floor, breathing in fiberglass and history, realizing my dad hadn't just gotten tired of meetings. He'd seen something coming. And if he'd left this behind, it wasn't by accident. I didn't sleep much that night. There's a certain kind of insomnia that doesn't feel restless. It feels focused. Like your brain has locked onto something and refuses to let go. I sat at the kitchen table with that metal lockbox open in front of me, scanning page after page into my laptop, backing everything up twice, because that's just how I'm wired. Cloud copy. External drive. Redundancy isn't paranoia, it's preparation. The earliest documents painted a completely different Maple Hollow. The original charter was simple. Lawn maintenance, shared snow removal, optional community events. No language about illumination levels. No vehicle visibility clauses. No pre-approval for having friends over. Then around year 7, amendments started stacking up. Aesthetic preservation. Structural conformity. Emergency authority provisions. Emergency authority caught my eye. It allowed the board president to make temporary rule changes without a vote in the interest of property value protection, pending later review. Temporary. I searched the later minutes for that review. Didn't find it. Instead, I found a meeting summary from 11 years ago. My dad's name listed under dissenting opinion. No transcript attached, just that phrase. Dissenting opinion. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. That was around the time he stopped talking about neighborhood meetings altogether. He used to come home annoyed but almost amused, like he'd just sparred with someone he respected. Then one year it stopped. He'd shrug if I asked. Not worth it, he'd say. Now I was starting to understand why. 3 days later, Leonard showed up at my driveway. He wasn't holding a violation this time. Just his keys, fidgeting with them like they were too hot to keep still. Mind if I ask you something? He said. Sure. You've been looking into old documents, haven't you? I studied his face. How would you know that? He exhaled slowly. Vanessa mentioned you were digging through outdated material. Said you were trying to stir confusion. Outdated material, I repeated. Leonard's eyes drifted toward the oak tree. Your dad and I worked on the original landscaping plan together. That tree was never supposed to be touched. Never? It predates the subdivision. It's a survey marker. Natural boundary reference. That word hit me like a small electric jolt. Boundary. I stood up. Show me. We walked out to the oak. It's massive, trunk wide enough that you can't wrap both arms around it. Near the base, partly hidden by old chain links from a long-gone swing set, was a small metal tag hammered into the bark decades ago. Faded numbers. A2. Survey point A2, Leonard said quietly. That's what we used when we divided the lots. Your property line runs 4 feet past where the current map says it does. 4 feet might not sound like much, but 4 feet is the width of Vanessa Pike's immaculate privacy hedge. I didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded once. I kept a copy of the original plat map. I don't know what version they're using now. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. The clerk pulled up digital archives dating back to 1974. The original subdivision map clearly marked A2 as the boundary for 3 adjoining properties, including mine. And sure enough, my lot extended 4 feet further than the current HOA diagram showed. The current diagram, filed 8 years ago under emergency authority, filed by Vanessa Pike. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the paper in my hands, heart beating slow and heavy. She hadn't just added petty rules. She'd redrawn land. When I got home, there was another letter taped to my garage. Violation code 12F, Hostile landscaping. Property owner has permitted unapproved natural overgrowth encroaching on community alignment. Hostile landscaping. I laughed out loud. The oak tree, apparently, was hostile. That's when it stopped being subtle. That evening I invited Leonard over. I also invited my sister, Claire. She's a paralegal in Boulder, sharp as broken glass when she needs to be. We spread the documents across the dining table like we were building a case. She changed the map under emergency authority, I said. But there's no record of homeowner ratification. Claire traced her finger down the amendment. Emergency authority expires after 90 days unless approved by 2/3 majority. Did she ever schedule a vote? Nope. Leonard cleared his throat. There was a winter proxy meeting that year. Low turnout. She said the matter had already been handled. Handled how? He didn't answer. 2 nights later, I heard something outside. It was close to midnight. Wind rattling the windows. I glanced out and saw a silhouette under the oak tree. Vanessa. She was crouched low, garden shears in hand, cutting at exposed roots near the base. I was out the front door before I fully processed it. What are you doing? I shouted. She stood up slowly, brushing dirt off her slacks like she was tending roses. Mitigating a hazard, she said calmly. The root system is destabilizing the sidewalk. That's my tree. That's under dispute. I stepped closer. You're on my property. You haven't proven that. The way she said it made my stomach tighten, like she was daring me. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Say that again. Her expression shifted just slightly, enough to tell me she understood the shift in power. She dropped the shears onto the grass. This doesn't have to become ugly, Owen. It already is. She walked past me without another word, heels sharp against concrete. I knelt down by the tree. She'd cut a shallow trench into the root system, not deep enough to kill it outright, but enough to weaken it over time. That's when I understood her motive. It wasn't about me personally. It was about that vote years ago. I found the old meeting notes the next morning. My dad had formally blocked a proposal to remove natural obstructions to allow for future expansion of pedestrian pathways. Translation, she'd wanted that oak gone. It stood in the way of straight lines and neat symmetry, and it stood in the way of moving that boundary 4 feet. If the tree disappeared, so did the original marker. This had been simmering for years. I needed more than maps. I needed intent. So I knocked on Vanessa's door. She answered in workout clothes this time, ponytail tight, expression already guarded. Yes? Why do you hate that tree so much? I asked. She blinked once. I don't hate trees. You tried to remove it 11 years ago. My dad blocked it. Now you've redrawn the boundary, and suddenly it's hostile landscaping. Her jaw tightened. Your father was obstructive. He clung to outdated interpretations. Progress requires adaptation. Progress doesn't usually involve changing property lines. Her eyes flashed. That land has always been ambiguous. Not according to the county. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. You're new here again, Owen. You don't understand what it takes to maintain standards. One stubborn homeowner can drag an entire community down. My dad wasn't dragging anything down. He was preventing you from grabbing for extra feet. For a split second, something raw crossed her face. Not anger. Something older. Frustration that had calcified. You think this is about 4 feet? She whispered. This neighborhood almost fell apart in the recession. People stopped caring. Lawns went brown. Paint peeled. Property values dipped. I stepped up when no one else would. And somewhere along the way, you decided you were the only one who should decide anything. Her voice went flat. I protect this community, even from itself. She didn't deny it. That night I got an email from an unknown address. Subject line, you're not the first. Inside was an audio file. No explanation. Just audio. I put on headphones and hit play. It was a recording of a board meeting from 9 years ago. Vanessa's voice, younger but unmistakable. We can push the amendment through under emergency authority. Most homeowners won't notice the boundary adjustment until spring. A male voice responded, hesitant. What about Carter? He'll object. Then we redefine obstruction standards. If the tree becomes a safety concern, we can remove it legally. My hands went cold. The male voice was Leonard. I called him immediately. I kept copies, he said quietly when he answered. I couldn't keep watching it happen. Your dad tried to fight it, but when the vote failed to remove her, he just stopped. Why send it now? Because she crossed a line cutting that tree. There it was. Intent. This wasn't misinterpretation. It was strategy. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Public session. I printed everything. The original plat map, the amendment clause, the recording transcript, photos of her cutting the roots. Claire helped me draft a formal motion demanding review of the emergency boundary change and a vote of no confidence under Article 7C. It required signatures from 1/3 of homeowners. I walked door to door. At first, people were hesitant. No one wanted conflict. But once they saw the map, once they heard the audio clip, something shifted. Marisol, 2 houses down, admitted she'd been fined $200 for planting the wrong shade of tulips. An older vet named Don said he'd paid repeated penalties for parking his work van overnight. They weren't angry at the rules. They were angry at being cornered alone. By Wednesday night, I had 16 signatures, 2 more than required. On Thursday afternoon, I got one last letter slipped under my door. Withdraw your petition or face residency review for repeated noncompliance. Residency review. She was escalating. I folded the letter carefully and added it to the folder. This wasn't about trash bins anymore. It was about whether one person could quietly rewrite a community and call it protection. And I was done letting her do it. Thursday night felt heavier than it should have. The Maple Hollow Rec Center isn't much to look at. Beige walls, folding chairs that squeak when you shift your weight, a coffee machine that's older than most of the landscaping rules. But that night it might as well have been a courthouse. People showed up early. Not the usual 5 retirees and 1 exhausted parent. I'm talking 25, maybe 30 neighbors, some standing in the back. Vanessa walked in last. She was wearing a navy blazer this time, hair pulled back tight, posture straight like she was stepping onto a stage. She didn't look at me when she sat down at the long table in front, just arranged her papers neatly, hands folded. Leonard was already seated to her left. He looked pale. The meeting opened with the usual nonsense. Approval of last month's minutes. Landscaping budget review. She moved through it quickly, probably hoping to bury my motion at the end when people were tired. When she finally said, "Next item, homeowner grievance submitted by Mr. Owen Carter," her tone was so controlled it almost impressed me. I stood up, folder in hand. "Before I begin, I'd like to distribute supplemental materials," I said. Claire handed copies down the rows. I saw people scanning the first page, eyes narrowing. Vanessa gave me a thin smile. "Please keep your remarks concise." "I'll try." I plugged my laptop into the small speaker system they use for holiday playlists. "There's been some confusion," I started, "about my property line, about the oak tree in my yard, and about certain amendments passed under what's called emergency authority." Vanessa shifted slightly, but said nothing. I held up the original plat map from 1974. This is the county recorded subdivision map. It shows survey point A2 as the natural boundary marker for 3 lots, including mine. Murmurs. Papers rustling. Then I held up the current HOA diagram, filed 8 years ago. This one shifts that boundary 4 feet inward, reducing my lot and expanding the common area adjacent to it, which conveniently aligns with the location of Ms. Pike's privacy hedge. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Emergency authority allowed temporary changes, I continued, but only for 90 days unless ratified by a 2/3 homeowner vote. There is no record of that vote ever taking place. She leaned forward. That matter was addressed during winter proxy session. Then it should be documented, I said calmly. It isn't. Silence. And then I clicked play. Her voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. We can push the amendment through under emergency authority. Most homeowners won't notice the boundary adjustment until spring. A soft gasp from somewhere in the back. The recording continued. If the tree becomes a safety concern, we can remove it legally. I paused the audio. That was 9 years ago, I said. This week, Ms. Pike was recorded cutting into the root system of that same tree at midnight. Vanessa stood abruptly. That recording is taken out of context and possibly obtained illegally. Leonard cleared his throat. It's real, he said quietly. Every head in the room turned toward him. I was there. I voted with her. I regret that. Vanessa stared at him like she didn't recognize him. Leonard kept going, voice trembling but steady enough. We didn't schedule a proper vote. We assumed no one would challenge it. Carter's father did. We pushed anyway. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly. You're exaggerating procedural nuance to create drama, she snapped. Procedural nuance? I echoed. You redrew a property line without homeowner approval. For the sake of community integrity, she shot back. That tree obstructs. It marks the original boundary, I cut in. Removing it erases the evidence. Now the murmurs weren't soft anymore. Marisol stood up. You fined me $200 for tulips that didn't match the approved palette. Don raised his hand from the back. You threatened to tow my van because it didn't fit the aesthetic. Another voice chimed in. You told my kid to move his bike because it lowered property value. Vanessa lifted both hands, trying to regain control. Standards exist for a reason. You think buyers care about your tulips? About your bikes? Order maintains value. Order or control. Someone muttered. That's when Claire stood. Article 7C allows for a vote of no confidence if 1/3 of homeowners petition for removal due to misconduct. We have 18 verified signatures. She handed the list to the board secretary. Vanessa's face had gone pale now, but her voice stayed sharp. Even if I'm removed, the vice president assumes duties. The structure remains intact. The vice president raised her hand slowly. I signed the petition, she said. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa looked around the room, searching for an ally. She didn't find one. Luis, the quiet board chair who'd barely spoken all year, leaned into his microphone. We will vote, he said simply. One by one, hands went up. Yes, yes, yes. 6 in favor. 0 opposed. Vanessa did not vote. There was no applause at first. Just a long exhale from the room, like everyone had been underwater. She stood, gathering her papers with deliberate movements. You'll regret lowering standards, she said quietly, not to the room, but to me. Maybe, I replied. But we won't regret having a say. She walked out without another word. The meeting dissolved into clusters of conversation. People shook my hand. Not like I'd won something. More like we'd all set something down together. Leonard approached me slowly. I should have spoken up years ago, he said. You did tonight. He nodded once and slipped something into my palm. A small brass key. Your dad gave this to me after that vote failed. Said if things ever got twisted beyond recognition, I'd know who to give it to. The key was old, worn smooth. It fit the small shed behind the oak tree. I waited 2 days before opening it. The shed wasn't full of tools like I expected. It was organized. Labeled boxes, old meeting binders, and on a small shelf, a tape recorder. I swapped in fresh batteries and pressed play. My dad's voice came through, scratchy but steady. If you're listening to this, it means someone tried to move the line without asking. Remember this, Owen, lines aren't just dirt. They're agreements. And agreements only matter if everyone gets a voice. I sat on the floor of that shed for a long time. After Vanessa's removal, the board scheduled new elections. Half the members resigned. The bylaws went under review. Emergency authority was rewritten with strict limits and mandatory public documentation. I didn't run for president. I didn't want power. I just started attending meetings. Quietly. Asking questions. Making sure minutes matched recordings. The oak tree healed. The shallow trench she'd cut filled back in over the weeks. In early fall, its leaves turned the kind of gold that makes everything look forgiven. Vanessa moved out 3 months later. Some people said she'd been unfairly humiliated. Others said it was overdue. I don't know where the exact line sits between necessary order and overreach. I just know what it felt like to watch someone slowly rewrite reality and call it protection. Communities don't collapse because someone plants the wrong tulips. They collapse when people stop speaking because they think they're alone. Sometimes I sit on my porch at night, porch light on, truck finally running in the driveway, and I think about how close it came to being simple. Pay the fines. Trim the tree. Stay quiet. It would have been easier. But easy doesn't build trust. And here's the part one still wrestle with. Vanessa wasn't entirely wrong. Neighborhoods do decline when no one cares. Standards matter. Maintenance matters. Shared responsibility matters. But so does consent. So does transparency. So if you've ever dealt with an HOA, or a boss, or anyone who claimed they were protecting something while quietly tightening their grip, I'm curious where you draw that line. Was I defending fairness, or just my 4 feet of dirt?